was cute, wasn't it? I thought so. Like I mentioned, we're starting a new series today, and it's on one of my favorite stories in the Old Testament. But just as a reminder, to grab a study guide when you leave or download one, and to not take my word for everything. God has given you the scriptures and a brain and other people to wrestle with some of these things. And my hope is that you can take notes, you can do that so that you get better acquainted with who God is in the book than we can in the 20 or 25 minutes or 30 or 35 or however you get it. What, Bobby, no? Okay, in the 26 and a half minutes that we have here. Now, this is my favorite story in the Hebrew Bible. We call it the Old Testament as Christians, but for our Hebrew Jewish brothers and sisters, it is just their Bible. It's the story of Jonah, and you've likely heard it, or at least heard a little bit about a story of a person who was thrown overboard, swallowed by a big fish or a whale, later to be regurgitated onto the beach safely and continue on their way. I love this story in part because when I was my first year of seminary in my first Old Testament class, we were eventually challenged to pick a book from the Old Testament, from the Hebrew Bible, and really dive into it and pull out as much of the human truths that we can see within it. And at that point, I thought I was being tricky, and I just picked the book of Jonah because it only has 4 chapters, to which the professor knew what was in my mind and eventually told me, Bainbridge. They called me Bainbridge. My teachers always called me that, never by my first name. Bainbridge, I hope you find some really good truths in this rather than just picking it because it was short. To which I assured him that was not the case. And then it led to weeks and weeks of diving into a story in a way that I never expected to and have fallen in love with. So I love this story. Now, here's the thing is you may have heard of this story. You may have questions about this story. Jonah is swallowed by a big fish. Maybe you have heard this throughout your whole life. Maybe you have questions or doubts. I know for some they struggle with this story, thinking that it is an exaggerated tale, which is why I call this series Big Fish, because growing up as a kid and fishing with my father, back before cell phones and taking pictures all the time, we would tell people about the fish that we caught, and it was always a little bit bigger than really it was. And so for some, the story of Jonah is just this type of story. It's a tall tale. For others, this literally happened and is true, while others are somewhere in the middle. And then yet there are some that have no idea what I'm talking about. If that is you in any of those, just hold on. Before we get into the specifics of the story, I want to share just a couple things about the context of the story. It always helps for us to understand where the story comes from. There may be people, I know, that when they read this story or others, they get hung up on the miraculous parts of this story, about the idea that somebody could actually survive within the stomach of a fish or a whale for 3 days and actually live through that. We, as humans, we struggle with the miraculous. We do. Humanity in general, now generalizing here, we have always had a Missouri attitude towards the miraculous. You know, I'm not going to believe it until you what? Until you show me. We struggle with the supernatural. If that's you, hang in there. You are in good company. But don't let that keep you from exploring some of the very rich human truths that are in this story. As far as Jonah goes, there are things in here that can speak to us and hopefully help us and the world, regardless of whether we believe in the miraculous or not. So I want to get into some of this. Now, you need to know this. Virtually nothing is known about the person of Jonah other than this book and a few mentions of him, one in particular in the historical book of 2 Kings in the Hebrew Bible. His name translates to the word dove, which, when we were singing the song, I noticed the dove up at the very top of the stained glass here, and that's a representation of the Holy Spirit, but Jonah, that is what that means. Jonah, prophet, and unlike other prophetic books in your Bible, Jonah's book is very different. Jonah's book is not some sayings against the Jewish people, for one. It's not a revelation of some oracles. It's not poetry in any way. Jonah's prophecy book is all about a story of a man who's been asked by God to go do something very, very difficult. And right from the start, you need to know that Jonah had a particularly difficult mission because he is the only prophet on record that we have that was asked by God to speak against people not Jewish. Were used to prophets. They would hear from prophets. They might not liked what the prophet had to say, but at least it was a part of their faith tradition. Jonah is being told to go somewhere towards people who have no clue who this God is and speak against them. And the story begins from our scripture reading that Audra did just a moment ago. It begins this way. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. God says, Jonah, you're my man. I need you to go do a job. I need you to go to this city and preach against their wickedness. You need to know this about Nineveh. Nineveh is this foreign, very powerful city in a country called Assyria. The people of Assyria did not believe in the God of the Israelites. They were also a dominant world power at the time and known for their particular brand of cruelty. They were always a threat to Israel's security. They were always looming. Their presence was felt in the area. And so Jonah is to go convince these people who don't know of their God, or at least look down on the Jewish God or despise the Jewish God. Jonah is told to go to a people who don't like you, to tell them that this God they don't respect or recognize is upset and wants them to change their ways. And you can almost imagine Jonah. I could put myself there. If Jonah told me to go do that, I'd be like, are you kidding me? Really? You really want me to go to the Denver Broncos and preach against them? Because you know we're Chiefs people here and Saints people. Jonah, he can't even imagine doing it. And so he does what we read earlier. He leaves. He retreats. That's what I'm calling today. This is the retreat. He takes off immediately, and he takes off to the other side of the world that he knew. The story continues. It says, Jonah ran away from the Lord, and he headed for Tarshish. He went down to the port of Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port of Tarshish. After paying the fare, he went aboard and he sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. So I've got a map of this that kind of helps put it into some context. And it's not easy to see, but you can see the very bottom red area. That's the port of Joppa. Right up above it is where Nineveh is at. Jonah is located around the Joppa area. That is the area of Israel. And so rather than now it was a long trip by foot up north. Rather than doing that, he finds a boat to go as far west as you possibly can in that time and place. Not only did he just say no, he ran as far away to the opposite end of the world as he could. He does what maybe some of us would do. Oh, God, you want me to do that? Oh, thanks, but no thanks. I don't want to do that. Now, you need to know this. This does not mean, though, that Jonah is completely abandoning his faith. He's connected still with his faith, but there's just this one thing that's a little bit too difficult to do. He doesn't want to do it, and he is not going to do it. Now, here's the thing. Humanity has always preferred things being fair, things being just, things being right. Humanity, taken to the other extreme, has always preferred judgment and destruction of their enemies, of the ones who persecute them. That's what we prefer. We want justice. We want judgment. We want revenge. We don't necessarily want grace. We don't want forgiveness and acceptance of others, especially those who are our enemies and even our mortal enemies, right? I mean, it's true then. Some would say it's not true today, but I see social media. And I see people, especially in this country, who have got ourselves so politically divided that we can't even listen to one another. Sure, we don't wish the people that vote differently than us to die or get COVID, although I've seen that. Yeah. But we certainly can't listen to their voice. And we certainly can do everything we can to make sure their voice is not heard because their voice is dangerous. Am I right? No, we want justice. It's a human trait. It's normal. We struggle when we're told to go and give grace to an enemy. We want the other path, and that's Jonah's story. He's told to go and extend grace to his enemy, and what does he do? He runs, he retreats. And here is one of the life lessons we can learn in this very first few sentences of this book, is that when people run, runners, they run from something. I have rarely ever seen runners run to anything. They run away. We run away from what we know we should do, or we run away from what we feel like is what is right. Maybe we run away from God because we associate life with God. And life is disappointing, so God is disappointing. Or life is bad, therefore God is bad. And so we run from God. Maybe it's a hardship or tragedy or a storm or whatever that is, and we can't wrap our brains around it, so we blame that on God as well, and we run from that. Or maybe it's because our only experience of this God that loves us comes from the mouth of somebody who is so hate-filled and revenge-filled and wanting to be right that we just dismiss God altogether, because if that is God, I don't think God would blame us for that, but we run. We run away. We run away from an idea that God places in our mind. God doesn't make sense. God, logically, I can't figure it out, and so we run from God. Or maybe we see God as a set of rules in this legalistic terms that we've got to do this and this. God is a party pooper, and he takes away all the fun, so I'm going to run from God. Listen, I have run from God for any number of those in my life, but we do it. We run. You've probably been there at some point, or maybe you're there today. Or maybe someone you love is there today. And so today is a reminder for you. But for Jonah, you need to know he ran, but was still good with God. He was still okay with God. As far as we know, he was good with God. He was connected to God. He was a prophet after all. God spoke to him. He worshiped God. He received messages from God. But for Jonah, there was this one thing that he could not do. There was one aspect of the faith that he could not stomach, and so he ran. He didn't want to go to Nineveh. He didn't want to go on a mission with God. And for me, that's the real truth for a lot of faith-filled people, is we are good with God. We like to worship and maybe read and connect with people, but there's always that one thing that we want to run from. Maybe it's our finances. We know what God says about money, but we just don't want to do it. Well, no, you know what? I'll read my Bible, and I'll go to worship, and I'll serve somewhere, and I'll pray for the people in Haiti, but God, don't ask me to do anything with whatever it is I have. It might be a moral issue we have with our relationship with God. But still, again, we do all of the other practices, but God, don't you dare ask me to change my morality in one way or another. Or maybe, like Jonah, God is calling you to step out and do something that is scary and uncomfortable and a mission into this world, and you think to yourself, man, I've got it good. And to step forward is going to cost me something. And we run from it. We run from things. We rarely run to things. And the other thing I've known about things, about people who run, is not only do we run from things, but when we do, we look for places to hide. That's what Jonah does. Jonah goes, he pays the fare to get on this boat. It says he goes to the hole down below in the boat so that he can hide. He's hiding from something, from God. And we tend to try to hide from God in all sorts of things. Again, some of these are just from my own experience. We hide from God in relationships, from one after another after another. We hide in substances. We hide in our busyness and in our achievements or in our excuses. We hide in our intellects, that somehow we are smart enough to not need God. We hide in our rugged independence and our self-sufficiency. We hide in all sorts of things. Sometimes we construct all sorts of worlds around us so that we don't have to face the things that we know we should change. We hide. Runners run from something and look for places to hide. So, just real quick, because something may be bubbling up, what are you hiding from? What are you running from? In the next verse, the story continues. It tells us this. They're in the ship, they're in the boat, they're out in the sea, but the Lord hurled a powerful wind over the sea, causing a violent storm that threatened to break the ship apart. Now remember, Jonah is here, he's down below, he is asleep, he doesn't know what's going on. The others on the ship are in full freak out mode. They are throwing everything they can overboard to try to lighten the load so that they can survive this. They're doing everything possible to save themselves. And there's a few interesting things in this moment of this story that I just want to highlight. One is this, that these, I'll just use the word pagan. Pagan just means people who weren't Jewish or Gentile. You can use Gentile if that sounds friendlier. But these pagan sailors, they're fighting for their lives, all the while Jonah, the prophet of the Lord, the one that we sang about, the Lord of the sea, is there asleep, not even knowing what's going on. So that's one thing that's happening. Once Jonah, though, is awakened, he knows what's going on, and he knows the reason for it. He knows that he is responsible for that. And so he tells the sailors, hey, you need to throw me overboard. I'm the reason this has happened. You need to get rid of me. Then what happens is, again, these pagan sailors, they are so much more courageous than Jonah ever was, because they say, no, we're not going to throw you overboard. We're going to do everything we can to survive this. They even then start to pray to Jonah's God, asking for forgiveness for what they have to do, which is to throw Jonah overboard. And when they do, the storm calms. And this story is to take us through this imagery and these feelings so that we can come to understand that there comes a point whenever we realize what we've done and we stop running, that storms calm and the seas, they ease. That's what the story is crafted for us to understand. And now you need to know, I don't personally think that God makes storms and calamities to teach us a lesson. I don't think God sends hurricanes to different countries or cities as a judgment on some sort of behavior. I don't believe that, but I do believe that God doesn't always stop the storms from happening. And I do believe that times God allows these things to continue on because they're a consequence of the actions that we've taken. But I also believe that when we're in it, God is there with us. Sometimes they're storms of our own doing, sometimes they just happen. But I believe God can use those to get our attention, to wake us up, to pull us out of our hiding place, and to win us back. That's what's happening here. Jonah goes aboard. A big fish comes and him and gives him a ride to shore. And I love the way that the story tells how this happened. It says, now the Lord provided. So God provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. And I'm going to leave that till next week. One of the best parts is coming up. Listen, we are clearly told in the story that Jonah's rescue was provided by God, although it was unorthodox and probably terrifying for him. It was yet God who provided that rescue. He provided a way out for Jonah to get back to the life that God called him to do. And what Jonah learns through this, maybe you and I can learn from this as well, is that you really, no matter what you do, you can't outrun God. You can run, but you can't outrun God. God is there. And the point is this, that God is not necessarily pursuing you on your run. What happens is when you finally stop and turn around, you realize that God was there in the first place. God is there to win you back. Jonah discovers that in the belly of the whale or the fish. God is there. And if you are in a storm, maybe today is the day to realize that God is there with you as well. So I've run in life. In May of 2010, I ran from being a pastor. I quit being a pastor. I left the church to which I was appointed as a last-ditch attempt to save a marriage that was drowning, which ultimately led to divorce. I ran from everything I knew because at that moment, everything that I had loved and hoped for was ending, and I didn't know what to do. A few weeks after I left, my lead pastor, Pastor Aaron Brown, came to me and said, Ben, I'm not replacing you because you've done nothing to leave. You just need to come to your senses and come back. And I told him, thank you, but no thanks. A few weeks later, he said the same thing, and I said, thank you, but no thanks. A few weeks later, we were having dinner with some friends in Springfield. He confronted me in front of other people, to which I said, yes, I will come back. But I will confess, primarily, it was to shut him up so he would quit asking, because I knew that eventually I would find a new job. And so the conditions of my acceptance was I will, but it will be September before I come back. I need a few months, hoping that I would find something different. It would be easy to tell him, hey, I found a higher paying gig somewhere else. I was sure that would happen. But that summer was a summer for me to relearn how to live. Me and 3 teenagers crammed into an apartment, and boy, did I learn how to live. That particular summer was also a summer that I met a sister for me for the first time in my life. I have a sister that I met when I was 5, but for all intents and purposes, I don't remember that. So about the age of 35, I called her out of the blue, which was always kind of exciting. And we decided that we were going to meet up, and I was going to drive down to Baton Rouge to meet with her because she lived in southern Louisiana. And on that particular July, that summer, I took a road trip, and I love to road trip. I love to drive. I love to have the windows open. I love to have playlists and music blaring. And on that particular day, me and Janice was my car, by the way. Anybody name their cars, or is it just me? Okay, very little, or those who are brave enough to do it. Me and Janice drove south through southwest Missouri and then through Arkansas on an extremely hot and sunny day. Man, it was hot. Usually when I drive, I try to get there as quick as I can, but on this particular day, I decided to take my time. And so when I was in the middle of Arkansas, I hit I-20 and went all the way over near the border and decided to hit a 2-lane highway that went down by the Mississippi River, thinking being able to drive next to the river would be a cool view, not knowing that because of levees along the river, you can't actually see it. My GPS was a liar. On the GPS, it was right there, but I couldn't see it. The little towns were nice, and it was a beautiful drive. But here's the thing. After a few hours, about an hour or so before I was to cross the Mississippi River, I felt this voice pop up telling me that when I get to the river, I need to get out and get in it. And I thought to myself, there was no way I'm going to do this, because on this particular summer, the Mississippi River had just flooded. It has a nickname, by the way, called the Muddy Mississippi, right? And on this particular July day, it was extremely muddy. I just had listened to the radio and heard of the flooding in Memphis, and I thought for sure there would be like dead bodies and all sorts of stuff. There's no way I was getting into it. So I said, thank you, but no thank you, and I kept driving. More time passes, and I heard the voice again, get in the water. Thank you, but no thank you. And when I pulled into Vidalia, Louisiana, to cross the river to get into Mississippi, to go south just to get back in Louisiana. It'll make sense if you look at a map. As I'm pulling in there, I hear this voice again, Ben, get in the water. And so to shut the voice up, I pulled over to public access, and I rolled up my pant legs, and I went and I stepped out into the Mississippi River, and I turned around, and on the way back to my car, I literally said out loud, there, are you happy? And the voice changed and said, Ben, listen to me. Get in the water. And so I froze, and I took a deep breath, and I cursed under my breath. I remember these moments. I turned around, and I walked into the river, fully clothed, and I laid on my back, and the voice changed and said, Ben, you will be okay. Just breathe, I'm with you. After that experience, I went back out with my phone because I wanted to take a picture so I would always remember. And I shared this on Facebook, so every time the memories pop back up, I'm reminded of this moment where 2 minutes in a river felt like an hour. I returned to my car, and out in the parking lot, I stripped off all my wet clothes, not caring, by the way, that this was a public access area. And there I am, in all my pasty white naked glory, finding something dry to wear. I am there in the midst of a moment. The blistering hot July day felt like a cool breeze for the next 2 hours, and I rode south, and I cried. And I remember tears of joy and peace rolled down my face, tears that felt greater than any of the tears I had for months. I didn't even try to stop them. I just let them happen. And as I was trying to analyze what happened, I got a text from a friend that just simply said something like this: Ben, I hope you're having a great trip. You deserve this time. And I pulled over at a gas station and I sobbed and I cried. Listen, there have been few times in my life where I felt that God actually spoke to me. And this is one of those. There, on the side of the highway, I cried and I prayed and I thanked God for a new start. And I confessed my failures, because I had many. And I asked for forgiveness. And I texted my friend and some other friends back. I thanked them for being Jesus to me. And then I headed south on I-20 to Baton Rouge. That day, July 9th, 2010, changed my life. Now listen, I was still afraid. I was terrified and insecure about what it meant to turn around and go back to being a pastor. But I knew I could make it. I was sure at that moment that the reason that I hadn't found another job, not just like a better job, but like any job, is because I was made to do this. And I could see clearer in that moment than I had in months or years. I saw myself clearer than I ever had. Somewhere between the water and my nakedness, I saw all the ugliness and the beauty that I had, and I was not afraid of any of it. The water and the sunshine in Jesus made me new that day, and it changed me. And he changed me, and he empowered me. That journey and that experience in the water made me become the man that I am today, and gave me no other choice than to go out and tell people of this God that changed my life in my darkest hour. Here's what I know. When you encounter Jesus, especially in your darkest moment, something happens. And when you turn around from your running, something happens. What has been my experience is that in all of the dark running in my life and all of the hiding that I have done, I was not alone. God was there. So what about you? What is your Nineveh? What are you running from? Where are you hiding? What is God asking you to go try and to go do? What is something that your heart is pounding, saying you need to say yes, but your mind is saying no. If you're running right now, listen, God is still looking for you, not to pay you back though, but to win you back. And the good news is that you can run all you want, but you can't outrun God. God's love eventually finds you in your hiding place and calls you back to a mission, or calls you back to be the person that God created you to be. So may you and I stop running. May we turn around and get found. And when we do, may we get closer and closer to being the people that God has made us to be. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.